Good afternoon, Husky fans. Thank you for turning into the 17th episode of Husky Dash with your hosts at Nathan Mathisen and myself at 9_3/4. Today, we're going to be diving into last week's game against Oregon, a look at our defense, and then this week's game against Oregon. I feel like I said Oregon twice there. Did I say Stanford the first time? Okay,
Nope.
Sorry. Last week's game against Stanford, this week's game against Oregon. Sorry. My starts are just terrible week to week, apparently. But we're going to be starting with dog snacks. UW falls out of the CFP top 25 after our loss versus Stanford this past weekend. This isn't a dog snack, it's just a snack, I guess. The Big Ten is set to formally adjust minimum game requirements for their championship game to allow Ohio State to play against Northwestern. The rules originally required that teams, it was either they have played at least 6 games or more than 6 games. Ohio State is currently sitting at a record of 5-0 through 5 games, with the possibility of their 6th and final game before the championship being canceled, which is why the rule change is coming about. In other news, Steilacoom native, I want to say, he's in Steilacoom right now as we're speaking. Emeka Egbuka, the nation's top wide receiver recruit, will be picking between Ohio State, Oklahoma, and UW on Friday. If I just talk slower, perhaps there will be less mistakes. Let's try that. Okay. After that, let's head into segment 1. UW versus Stanford ID, as always, after we have those weekend games. Let me fix my screen. Okay. Stanford scores on their first drive, and that's about how the rest of the game goes. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, it was a struggle for the Husky defense throughout the entire game, really, especially against the run. And that's one of the reasons that our second topic is going to be devoted entirely to that. Something though, looking at the positives, trying to grab at them from that game against Stanford. I was kind of impressed with Dylan Morris. I mean, not like overly impressed, but he was a positive I could see from the game. He was coming off probably his worst overall game against Utah in his short career, where he threw 3 interceptions. And coming in here against Stanford, it was a relatively safe game. He had 0 interceptions. He didn't throw any touchdowns besides the one that got called back because of holding, which I'll actually touch on later. But overall, he was 15 for 23, 254 yards passing, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He added some running with 7 carries for 36 yards and a touchdown. Overall, kind of just an average game from him. He finally was able to connect on a few deep passes, which is something that we'd been harping on over and over again as something he needed to improve on. He managed to connect on a few of those, and those were really the only big plays that happened for this Husky offense.
Yeah, but like on the topic of on the topic of Morris, there were these 2 fouls against Morris and the Huskies, I think in the second or third quarter. That really just showed how inexperienced he is as a freshman as an incoming quarterback who's just young and doesn't really have that game time experience. I think one of them was a delay of game, and the other was something similar. Where
are you talking about the first drive of the game where there was the 12 men on the field?
The 12 men on the field followed by the delay of game. Yeah, I mean, like the first one obviously wasn't really in Morris's control. You can't really dictate what your 12th player who gives you that foul is doing at the time, whether that was like a personnel change that got messed up or something. That's just something that shouldn't happen at the high school level, at the college level, at the professional level. You should never have more than 11 guys on the field unless it's like a huddle or water break. I mean, it's a dumb foul. You shouldn't be getting it. The second one, though, that delay of a game, that's never an excuse for a quarterback. I feel like you should be in charge of that game clock, that play clock especially, and you should be aware of it the entire time you're on offense and live on that field because of how important it is. I think we were looking at like a decent first down chance, like a pretty easy first down chance at that point, I think, until those fouls came up, right?
Yeah, I was going to talk about this a little later, but talk about it now, just how it was a 3rd and 5, and then they got the 12-men substitution foul 5 yards back, 3rd and 10, and even coming off of a penalty, they somehow get a delay of game, putting it at 3rd and 15, where they then couldn't convert, obviously.
Yeah, and it was some other things too. Morris really taking in stride, I think, those interceptions he threw last week, throwing less contested balls this game. not throwing any interceptions, if I remember
Yeah, he
correctly.
had 0 interceptions.
Yeah, zero turnovers for Morris, which is great. But I mean, again, there's that lack of throwing the contested balls, and oftentimes I think you could see on field him looking at that decision like, do I throw this tough pass right now or do I run it for those 3 yards? And I think I think almost all the time I saw him choose to run when I think he could have pulled off some of those passes.
Yeah, I think Morris this week, he clearly didn't do enough to win this game, but what he did would have been enough to win a game where the defense stepped up and made some plays or they had a more solid running game. So overall, he didn't make enough plays this week to win based on what all was going on, but he did play kind of a game that is kind of what Jimmy Lake, I think, wants out of him, being cautious. I mean, you look at the first few weeks where they relied so heavily on the run, and that's what Jimmy Lake wants to see, and that's kind of the direction Dylan Morris played this game, only they didn't have that super great run game this week, and they didn't have that great defense to bail him out or to help make the game easier.
No, absolutely. And I think some of that comes down. I don't remember where I talked about this because I feel like all three of these segments had pretty similar themes or issues running through them, with things we needed to talk about, address, and things that the Huskies needed to improve on. We were missing a couple of key players again, whether they were on the field or completely off. I mean, one guy doesn't make plays a game. That can't be an excuse for the rest of the defense. I mean, although to be completely honest, going from like back to back games where you had all-American like national award performances and then running a game where you had goose eggs across your stat sheet is insane in my head. But at the same time, I feel like as a defense, like that's one guy who's not doing something. As a defense, you have 10 other people on the field who can be making tackles, making plays. And yeah, there were some seniors, juniors, sophomores who like freshmen as well, who stood up and made those plays, but no one was there to replace that lack of impact that ZTF usually has. Like there was no one there to fill those shoes, even if there were still other people standing tall and making the occasional play. That's something that has to change heading into Oregon. Is like you just can't let your one-star player or a star player dictate how the rest of your defense or offense performs.
Yeah, they definitely weren't able to make up for the lack of production that ZTF usually brings. I mean, they had 0 sacks in the game, which ZTF, I guess, Stanford figured out how to block him, and then Stanford also just simply heavily relied on that run game. But then looking at a kind of a positive, you looked at people missing the game, and 2 guys who did miss the game that had been a focal on the offense, Trell Bynum and Puka Nakua at wide receiver. They both were gone for an unnamed reason, possibly COVID related. And in their place were Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan, 2 true freshman wide receivers who've had a lot of hype. Through the first few weeks, they haven't had a ton of production. They've both kind of been plagued with drops. But this week, Rome Odunze really stepped up and he made some key plays. I mean, he led the team in catches with 5 receptions for 69 yards. He had a couple of nice catches. He did also have 1 drop again this week. But overall, the true freshman wide receivers played a solid game. And even Ty Jones, the veteran of the group, the junior for the wide receiver, he had his best game, I believe, as a Husky. He only had 2 catches, but he had that one amazing one-handed deep ball down the left side. And then he did have a touchdown catch that then, of course, got called back for holding. So I guess it doesn't count. But overall, the wide receiver group really stepped up in the absence of the 2 leaders in Nakua and Bynum.
Yeah, I was gonna say Odunze did an absolutely fantastic job in fulfilling the role. I mean, he went with 5 receptions, 69 yards.
Yeah.
But I mean, then again, like you have to measure like a player's entire performance, and I feel like Odunze with his 2 rushing attempts at negative. I mean, I'm looking at stat sheet. Like every rush he's been on this season, like in 2020, has been for at least a conglomerate of negative yardage. He had 1 rush in our first game for -6 yards, and now he's had 2 rushes this game for a total of -10 yards.
I wouldn't really put the blame on Odunze. I just think that play hasn't worked, that kind of sneaky end around that they've tried with him. I mean, it kind of cost him this past game. It was a 2nd and 10 they ran it on, and it absolutely got blown up, and they lost 10 yards, and all of a sudden had a 3rd and 20.
Yeah, and I really don't know what it is about that play, because I mean, you see it succeed at every level from Pee Wee to the NFL, and it's just something about our team running it where it just doesn't ever really seem like it's doing all that great. I don't know what it is, whether it's a DN pull, if we're just way too obvious about it on offense. But I mean, it sucks that I think Odunze has had to run that a bunch of
Yeah,
times.
I meant to look at that play over one more time. I wasn't able to squeeze it in, but the play with the Odunze where he lost 10 yards, it was kind of different than the previous ones they'd run. They actually motioned over a different wide receiver and then had him come over and it was just an odd play design that I'd never actually seen run. So, and it clearly didn't work. So maybe they can scrap that from the playbook.
Something that needs to change for Oregon, perhaps.
Yeah.
Speaking about changes, before you can make a change, you have to recognize where you're at. And that's what we're doing with the second segment, is just where are we defensively? Where were we at the start of the season, kind of? How did we get to where we're at right now, and what's happening with the defense? Obviously, there's some roster issues, not anything super big. I mean, some guys not getting a ton of playing time, losing some playing time. The only real big thing that's happened is Kyler Gordon's been replaced by Alex Cook as a starter for DBs. And that's, I mean, honestly,
Kyler Gordon's actually gotten more playing time.
No, he's replaced Alex Cook on the roster.
Oh,
on the depth
yeah.
chart.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. Sorry. Like that's the big change, is that he replaced Alex Cook.
Yeah.
And that's the only real change that we've been able to garner out of the release of the depth chart heading into Saturday against Oregon. If anything else comes up, check the Dashboard's Twitter. I'm sure we'll post it there. But in good news, I think there are some changes incoming. Before I throw it over to you, Nathan, something I just wanted to point out that I think was really interesting was that the day after the game, the defensive line coach and co-defensive coordinator, Malloy, said that his D-line just didn't live up to standard, and that he took that very personally, that like his D-line didn't live up to their own standard. But on the same side of that token, the D-line apparently is taking this very personally as well. Whether it was a punishment from the coaches or just like self-driven passion. The day after the game, it was either a Monday, that Sunday morning or Sunday early afternoon or something like that. The D-line was already back on the field hitting the sleds. And the D-line coach was very confident during his press conference that they were going to be a much more physical and consistent group come Saturday against Oregon. So if those things are to hold true, I think that's very good news for at least where part of our defense is at.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's true, but I'll believe it when I see it, I guess I'll say. Because the defense so far, this was clearly their worst game overall, I guess you could say. They struggle against the run, as they have in almost all the games except for Arizona. I mean, they allowed 191 rushing yards. Looking at other games, against Utah, it was 215. OSU was 167. And then, of course, Arizona was only 72 because Arizona got in such a deep hole early on. But overall, they just can't stop the run for whatever reason. Stanford averaged 4.8 yards a carry. And another issue that hadn't been happening in the previous games, but was the third down conversion rate. Stanford was 10 for 13 on third down. And that they were 10 for 12 until they didn't convert one on their last drive, which they then converted on 4th and 1 or something. So they nearly converted every third down they needed to. And the UW defense was just on the field for more time than the Husky offense, which is never a good sign. And Stanford simply ran down their necks. I don't know why that is. You look at some of these players on the Husky defense, and you'd think it'd be great. Ulafosio, a great linebacker. And then you look at in the middle, they've got Tuli Gasanoa, Josiah Bronson, Sam Tamani, kind of the three leaders, all great players on paper, I guess. But through these games, they just haven't been able to. And you mentioned what the coach said, not being kind of physical enough. And what I've seen is the same. They're not able to get off these blocks. And it just allows for these wide gaps where the running back easily gets through the first level of defense. And that's one of the reasons you look at the stats sheet. Ulafosio has so many tackles. Against Stanford, he had 18 tackles. That 13 of those were solo tackles. So these D linemen just aren't making tackles. They aren't able to get off the blocks. The only defensive lineman with more than one tackle was Latuli Gasanoa. He had 5 tackles. Everyone else on the D-line had 1 tackle, or in ZTF's case, had 0 tackles. So it was not a great showing by the D-line at all, and maybe it's a good thing they got out there Sunday to hit the sled and try and work on technique.
Yeah, I think they might have needed it, because when you have a team come out of a weekend with a dub and all of those rushing attempts and yards, and your D-line, like one guy has more than 1 tackle, and even then it's only 5, like something happened between the offensive tackles on the defensive side of the ball that should not, or I guess in this case, just something didn't happen, because that's what it looks like with those stat lines for tackles and whatnot. Congrats to Ula Foshio for getting all of those tackles and those solo tackles. Like that's incredible to step up and try to push your team forward like that. Sorry, but yeah, tackling is the other thing I was going to talk about. Is just missed tackles. I feel like for so long, or at least for a while under Jimmy Lake and in our defensive coaching staffs over the past couple of years, it's been this like, let the short pass come, let the run come at us, get those stops, and definitely I think a big key about what our defensive structure is supposed to be is that when you make contact, I mean, like the other team should have 0 yards after contact as a stat line. When you're playing the Huskies, that's like the key goal of our offense is like, sure, they're going to get these short passes for 3, 4, 5 yards in that short range area, but we're going to come up and make those stops so they don't get those first down conversions. That's not happening right now. And for where we're at defensively, something has to change, whether that's like improved tackling performance and technique, like the defensive line on those sleds, or if it's just a completely changed defensive scheme now that Jimmy Lake's no longer a guy, he's the head coach now and not where he was as a defense. Sorry, I just forgot what the word coordinator was for a second. But I mean, obviously you have these coaching changes, you have these new players, you have this new system on offense. Maybe it's time for the defensive scheme to change too, because yes, we're 3-1, but I would not say defense has been like the key. I wouldn't say defense has been key contributing factors in any of the games we've won or the game we've lost. So, well, it was a key factor in why we lost, but I don't think it's been a key factor in any of our wins so far. And I think.
Well, I kind of disagree with you there quickly. Just the defense in the games that they've won have been a strong reason. You look at the Utah game, the first half of the defense clearly wasn't the reason, but second half defense, they flipped the switch and they allowed the offense to come back. You look at the Arizona game, it was clearly defense just absolutely stalled the whole Arizona offense. And the defense, when they've played good, they've allowed the offense to kind of work through their struggles and then improve as the game went on. This game against Stanford, the offense struggled, but the defense wasn't there to help them to kind of keep it somewhat close. And that's why the offense couldn't in the end come back.
Yeah, I'm actually going to have to agree with you here and not disagree and continue my point. I think I have to adjust my recent claim. I think something amongst the team is, I mean, there's clearly something not meshing. I clearly can't figure out what it is because I just said it was the defense and Nathan offered some pretty good counterpoints, but something I feel like is not clicking in the locker room, whether it's between players, between the coaches and players, something in the staff or the schemes, the plans, the plays, like whatever it is, something over there is just not coming together for those guys because, like, as you said, like, the defense absolutely had to come back in the second half of that game to allow the offense to come back and put points on the board and catch up and then overcome. But I mean, like, I think the biggest problem with the start of that is that the defense couldn't stop offense in the first half and our offense couldn't produce. That's why it was 21-0, 21-3 or whatever it was heading into half for 2 games. That's just, or 24-3, sorry. It's just, those aren't score lines you want heading into a half as any team in any sport. I feel like I mean, I guess score is a little, that's other stuff. But like going into halftime down 21 points is a team issue. Like that's not just defense, just offense. And I think you're right in correcting me on that. But as we head into changes and things we need to do for Oregon, that's something I think I've written in my notes just time and time again, at least for today's episode and this segment specifically for episode 3, segment 3.
Well, but before segment 3, just one last point on this defense. The defense made almost no plays. They did no help, except they made one play It was in the fourth quarter. Trent McDuffie forced the fumble. Ulafosio got it, ran it to the 10-yard line. They need their offense to do something. The offense, first play, first and goal, touchdown, right? No. Holding on Ulamu Ale, back him up. Now it's first and goal from the 20. What do? Just go backwards from there, and it's fourth down, and they kick a 45-yard field goal. You kick a 45-yard field goal when you're on the 10-yard line. That's not a good thing. The kicker made it, so props to Peyton Henry. He'd been struggling, but he made that kick. But yeah, the defense, they made a play when they needed it, yet the offense wasn't there to kind of finish it off.
The team thing. Big brain key points. Okay, segment 3, UW at Oregon, our first away game of the season, supposedly. Oh, also, if no one understood the last one, that was a song and an artist reference to having to run the ball and possibly losing, or them running the ball and us losing. So I guess that's where that went. But okay, there's a lot of controversy and some. I did a new SAT word today, hullabaloo, surrounding this game at Oregon between the Huskies and the Ducks. This morning, the University of Washington Athletics Department released did a press release stating that they've paused team activities for football this morning in compliance with COVID-19 protocols, following a notice of an increase in the positive cases within the football program. There we go. Lots of big jumbled words. They will not be having any practice at all today. According to a Seattle Times article, a source within the athletic program there says that they won't be making any decisions related to the game until PCR tests that were conducted today arrive with results sometime tomorrow. Now, some things that can happen depending on these PCR test results. The winner of the game, if it were to be played, will head to the Pac-12 championship game next week to represent the Pac-12 North. If the game is canceled, the Huskies would by default play in the championship game because we have the higher winning percentage record. We have a .75 winning record right now.
A quick point on that, though. They'd be awarded the Pac-12 North championship, but because of Seattle's testing and quarantine, if the game was canceled due to the COVID for the Huskies, then they wouldn't actually be able to play in the Pac-12 championship game because of the 14-day quarantine.
Thank you, Nathan. That was my next bullet point. I appreciate it. There's also a fear that if the game was canceled and we made the championship game, and we could, if the game was canceled, we were allotted the Pac-12 North slot to play in the Pac-12 championship game. Even with the quarantine guidelines allowing that, there's still a fear that we wouldn't even qualify for the championship game because of a Pac-12 policy that's being decided on right now about teams having 4 fewer games in our season. So if we didn't play, it's just a whole bunch of messed up things. And really the only way for the Huskies to make the championship game and become Pac-12 championships, if we want to, is to play Oregon and win. That seems like it's the thing that has to happen for us to make the championship game, is a game between us and Oregon. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is if that game, hopefully when that game happens. I think I let this one off to you to start, really.
Yeah, so I'll kind of look at Oregon a bit. We've looked at the Huskies. We've said everything that's wrong with them. But looking at Oregon, so they came into the season all hyped up. They were nationally ranked and all that. And they've kind of been a letdown the last 2 weeks. They're on a 2-game losing streak. They started off strong, but their last win was against UCLA, 38-35, November 21st. Since then, they've lost to OSU 41-38 and Cal 21-17 last week, and they've looked like they've had some issues. But then again, you look at UW. UW is coming off their first loss against Stanford, where they had some issues. So both teams, though, I guess you said the winner of this is going to the Pac-12 championship. So forget what's happened the last 1 week for the Huskies and 2 weeks for the Oregon. They each still have a shot at the championship. And Oregon the focus on them would be their struggling offense against Cal. They were down 17-21 in the fourth quarter, and they had 4 drives in the fourth quarter. 4 drives, that's about how many drives the Huskies had each half, maybe. There are not many drives in that, but so the 4 drives for Oregon in the fourth quarter, they went a 7-play drive that ended on Cal's 18, after they went for it on 4th and 1, didn't get it, so a turnover on downs. Then a 6-play drive ending in a fumble, a 3-play drive that went -8 yards and they punted, and a 6-play drive that ended in a fumble. That's how Oregon ended the game against Cal. Very forgettable. Oregon's offense, the entire game kind of fluttered. Their first 3 quarters didn't go very well at all. In total, they had 4 3-and-outs. They had one drive where they only had 4 plays. So overall, Oregon's offense, which at the start of the season looked like it could be great, it's been an issue for them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, unless you were about to say something.
No.
Okay, sorry. You took a breath. I was a little worried I was about to cut you off. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think, in my own opinion, and I think this is widely agreed upon, that historically Oregon has been a team that doesn't really care if you score while they're on defense because they trust their offense to just run the damn ball, whether that's run the ball up the field in some way, shape, or form, and they trust their team to be able to score on every drive that their offense has. I think that's true historically. But if that stays true when we play them this coming week, we need to be able to adapt, because like it's guaranteed at this point that they watch the film between us and the past 4 teams we've played, as they're literally the only 4 games we've played this season, and take their assumptions and their game time strategies based off of those 4 games. If I was them, low key, I'd just ignore the 3 games we won and say, what did Stanford do to beat the Huskies? That was their loss this season, even though it was 4 games. What'd they do? They're going to say, like, okay, target the rookie quarterback. He's not great yet with like big time decisions, like right at the line. And that there's like some players, if you take out of the game, functionality in those areas of the field start to drop, and efficiency starts to drop drastically for us. Whether that's like double teaming people like ZTF or making it hell in the deep secondary for people like McDuffie and Molden, or if that's taking people out on offense like Cade Otten. He only had two catches for some amount of yards, not terribly impressive. It was pretty minimal, really. And so Oregon's definitely going to do that. But I think on the same side of that token, you also have the Huskies, who are going to hopefully be doing that on the 2 losses Oregon's faced, and seeing like the things we can pick out. But with the historics of the Ducks on offense being fast-paced, being through the air, on the ground, very quick athletes, very fast athletes, something or someone has to step up on defense. I mean, we've been talking about it since preseason about having key players on the defensive and the offensive side of the ball, whether that's Molden, who steps up and has an even greater game than he's been having, that's steadily increasing performance, whether it's McDuffie, who steps up and just has an incredible game, whether ZTF comes back and says, hey, you know what, last week was an oddity. It was a outlier. There we go. I can't remember words today. It was an outlier. Like, hey, like, look at me this week. I'm back. Like 12 solos, 2 forced fumbles, and an interception somehow. But I mean, like, hey, if that's what he does, that's what he does. Coming into this game against Oregon, something on the defensive side of that's my TLDR. Something on our defensive side of the ball has to change against a team that's historically fast-paced and high-scoring.
Yeah, can't disagree with you there. You want to give a score prediction? What's your?
Okay, I have 3 technically 4 score predictions. Super quick. I actually wrote a butt ton about this game, and what I thought would have to happen, what would have to change, because I was really irked that we lost against Stanford. But I had a bunch of key goals. I said that if we met those key goals, I'm pretty confident that we'll win. It'll be really close, though. I'm saying 41-38, high scoring, beat them out by a field goal. That's the way the game looks. If these key goals are met only in part, we either lose just blowout, like 30-35-14, or it's a close game, not as high scoring, 35-32, still an Oregon win. If the goals aren't met at all, or just like ignored, it's a blowout. I'm thinking like 47, low 50s to 1-2, maybe 2.5 scores. So I'm thinking something like 47-14.
What are your key goals?
Oh, geez, what were my key goals? Really quickly. Must start offensive tempo in the first quarter. We cannot wait until the second half. In my opinion, in a broad stroke paintbrush kind of thing, they don't care about giving up. Okay, I said that. Similar. Okay, if they score, we cannot let it get into Morris's head by putting that pressure on his shoulders. Like he just doesn't have that confidence or in that composure yet to take points in off the field and then be able to put back up and put us over. We have to be able to learn how to lean on other portions of the team if we're missing personnel, like ZTF, who was just a no-show even though he was on the field, or people like Puka Nakua and Richard Newton not being able to play. Lastly, we have to keep up the positive and super high turnover ratio because I mean, if the other team's offense isn't on the field, they can't really. I mean, it's really tough to score when you don't have offense on the field. Those are my key goals. Those are what needed to be met. What's your score prediction?
Getting into mine quickly, we got a couple minutes. We got no shows after us, so just what I looked at it was the past 2 weeks tell me that UW's got a good chance and should be able to beat Oregon. But then if you look at the past 20 years, they scream Oregon's going to beat the Huskies. So you got to pick history or present. I mean, history, the only 2 times since 2004 the Huskies have won was the 2016 college football playoff year and then the year after that. So historically great Husky teams, and those years happen to also be historically bad Oregon teams. This year we have neither one of those. We've got an average Husky team and kind of an average Oregon team. So I'm picking Oregon. I think Oregon wins by 6 points maybe. Close game, but it could easily, depending on COVID and who's out for the Huskies, be an absolute blowout where the Huskies lose by double digits.
I mean, I feel like one last thing before I run out of time. I think if you want like my honest opinion, and I think Nathan might be thinking the same way as me, is that every football game, what it comes down to is that during that game, you're going to have a couple of key moments. And I'm sure anyone who's ever played football at any level has heard some coach in some form or another say something super similar to this. Every game comes down to a few key moments. We don't know when those key moments are, but they're bound to happen. Whatever player, whatever team is prepped to deal with those key moments and take advantage of them is generally the team who wins the game. You can look back at any, and I mean like blowouts too. You can look at those. There are key moments that occurred in that game where maybe if the other team had done something, they could have come back and prevented a blowout or even won the game. That's how I feel about the game coming up, and that's how I felt about every game going forward in the past. Yes, there's some precedent to the better team winning, but that's how I feel. And yes, I guess now, unless Nathan, you have one last thing you want to say. That just about finishes up all the time that we have for today. Once again, I'm Joseph Claypoole, and this is Nathan Mathisen. You can follow us on our different social medias with the @ that you see on screen right now. We're just a small part of the Dash Sports family. So if you'd like to meet the rest of the crew, which I strongly recommend that you do, please check out our website, dashsports.tv, and our partners' website, sportspac12.com. At that one where you can read into segments from our weekly shows, some of which are written by Nathan. So please go check those out as well. If you'd like to revisit the best moments of today's episodes, other teams' episodes, head over to our website where you can find clips, quips, tips, rips, terrible jokes, and as many full episodes as you can stand, all in one place, all for free, dashsports.tv. We'll see you next week, but for now, this is Husky Dash signing off.